fundamentals. So what I'll be doing is I'll give a kind of an introduction to the image and video processing task first, and then I'll very briefly introduce each of the deep learning models that are used for building systems to perform these image and video processing tasks, because there will be detailed sessions on each of these models I'll be referring to. So I'm not going into the details of each of the models as such, right? But I'll be talking about how those models can be used to perform these image and video processing tasks. I think many of you are familiar with the standard classification problem. What is shown here is the scene image classification task. We have images of each class in a particular column here. The first column contains the images of the tall buildings. The third column is the images of the streets. The fifth column is images of the coast, and so on, right? So once we have images of each of the classes, then we can train a model with this information about the images and their class labels using the supervised learning method. And then after the model is trained, if we give any one of the images of one of these classes, then the model is expected to give the class label corresponding to that input image. That's the standard classification task. Another important task, as we'll be seeing quickly, is what is called the image segmentation, where there are typically multiple objects present in a given image. We want to identify the regions of interest corresponding to the different objects that are present in the given image, and then we need to come up with a label for each of these objects that's present in each of the regions of the interest. So there are two tasks here. First task is what is called the localization task, where we need to identify the regions of interest. Typically, each region of interest is specified as a what is called a bounding box, which is typically in the form of a rectangle, like what you can see on the right hand side picture here, right? There are several blue colored boxes and also a few red colored boxes, and all these blue colored boxes correspond to the part of the image where there are persons, and all these red colored boxes correspond to the parts of the image where there are bicycles in that part of the image. So basically this requires coming up with the regions of interest which are specified by the bounding boxes, typically in a rectangular form, and then identifying the what kind of an object is present in each of these bounding boxes. That's what is called the object detection. Or there can be a pure segmentation task where I don't have to give only a rectangular bounding box. I can give a very complex shaped boundary surrounding an object of interest, like what is shown in the left hand side picture here. We have a cat that's present in the given image. So I want to identify the part of the image that contains the body of the cat. So this is what is referred to as the image segmentation problem, whereas this right hand side problem is normally referred to as the object localization and detection problem. Now let's say I have an image retrieval task where I have a set of images in a database. Then I want to perform the image retrieval by specifying a keyword as the query word. Like shown in this slide here, I have a set of images here. Then I give my tiger as the query word. Then I want to retrieve all the images in the database where the tiger is present, like what is shown as 5 images in this slide. In order to perform this kind of a task, one method is if we can do the annotation of each image to identify what are the different objects of interest that are present in the given image, then it becomes very easy to perform this retrieval task, because what all I need to do is match this query word with each of the labels of a given image. If it matches with the query word, then that image contains the query word related content, so I'll retrieve that image. If none of the labels of the particular image match with the query word, then we say that that image is not relevant to the query word, right? But in order to perform this kind of a image retrieval task, I need to identify what are all the different objects that are present in the given image. That task is what is called as the annotation task, where we assign more than one label to every image. So unlike a classification problem, where we attach only one label to each image. Here we assign one or more labels to every image, and the number of labels can vary from one image to another image. So it becomes actually a much more complex and challenging task. This is what is referred to as the multi-label classification model. As we'll be seeing later, one can train a deep learning model to perform this kind of a multi-label classification task, or one can also use the object localization and detection method and then identify the labels that are associated with every image. And once we do the annotation, the retrieval task becomes very simple. More challenging tasks which the humans are really good at doing is what we are going to look at next. The first one is what is called the image captioning task, where the task is given an image, we want to describe the content of that image by one or more sentences. Here we have a couple of examples where the content of an image is described using only one sentence, but it can be more than one sentence as well. So here we need a system that can capture the content of the image, then generate a sentence that describes the content of the image. Like the top image here, the caption can be something like a group of people at an outdoor market. So it's not just identifying the objects that are present in given image. You need to link the different objects that are present and then form a syntactically and semantically meaningful sentence, right, to describe the content of the given image. You can see that in the bottom image, we identify these different regions of interest. Then we give a label for each of these regions of interest, like we have woman, camera, cat, crowd, holding, and so on. Right? Then once we identify these objects of interest in the given image, then we try to come up with a sentence like a woman holding a camera in crowd as the caption for this image. So again, we want to develop a system where I have set of examples in the training data set. Every example includes an image and the corresponding caption as the desired output. And we want to train the whole system with this set of training examples. And after the system is trained, then when we give a new image as the input to the system, we want the system to generate the caption for that image. That is the task in the image captioning system. We can extend all these tasks for video data. As all of you know, video is a sequence of frames, and the length of the video will determine how many frames we'll have in the sequence. And typically, video will have three different types of modalities. It will include the visual data, that is the frames, the given video. We also typically have the audio, and nowadays we also have a text mode in the form of the subtitles, which are also sequences of words. In order to perform this video classification, one can make use of all these three different modes of data and then perform the task, or one may just focus only on using the visual data and then perform the classification task. In all these cases, we see that there are what are called the sequences that we have to deal with, and typically these sequences will vary in length from one example to another example of a video, even of the same class. So it becomes what is known as a sequential pattern classification problem, but one has to deal with the varying length sequential patterns. Again, we'll be seeing a few deep learning models which are designed for performing these tasks related to the classification of varying length sequential patterns, which can be used for tasks like the video classification. Like we talked about image captioning, we can also talk about video captioning, where given a video, we want to come up with a description of the content of the video. And typically, a given video will have several events, and we want to describe all the events that are present in the given video. So a typical video caption system will have one module that proposes the different events in the given video. Then we try to come up with a caption for each of these events, and then we generate the caption for the whole video together. So basically, there are two stages here: event detection and then event description. As shown with a simple example here, I have a few frames in the given video clip, and for the first part of the video clip, where there will be a few frames, the description can be like an elderly man is playing the piano in front of a crowd. And after a few frames, then we take the second part of the video where the event is described as a woman walks to the piano and briefly talks to the elderly man. Like this, there are 5 events in this case. Each of the events is described by one sentence. Then we put all these 5 sentences together to generate a caption for the whole video. So this requires taking a sequence of frames in the part of the video and then analyze the content and then generate a sentence to describe the content of that part of the video. Then put together all these different captions correspond to the different events together to generate the caption for the whole video. Then there are tasks where we give an image or video as an input and then we ask a question on the content of the image or video. Then we want the system to come up with an answer for that question based on the content of the image or video. The left side example here, you can see that I have an image here and I have a question like, is there something to cut the vegetables with? So in order to answer this question, we need to identify what are the different objects that are present in the given image. Then we need to understand that we need some object that can be used to cut the vegetables with, and all of us know that one can use a knife to cut the vegetables. So we have to look for the presence of an object like knife. If that object is present in the given image, the answer to the question is yes, as for the top image here, and the answer is no for the bottom image because in the bottom image there is no knife. The other kinds of questions one can ask is, in the given image, who is wearing the glasses? Again, for the left hand side image here, the answer is man, and for the right hand side image here, the answer is woman. Or the questions can be something like counting. The question here is, how many children are in the bed? So for the left side image here, the answer is 2, and for the right side image, the answer is 1. So these are all very complex tasks because we need to identify the objects, then we need to find out where the children are present, and then we need to count how many children are present in the given image, and then accordingly come up with the answer. Again, we can build a system where there are training examples. Every training example includes an image and the question, and typically there will be multiple choice type questions as in these cases, right? And there will be a correct answer, which is one of the options in the multiple choice options. And the system has to be trained using all this data. And after the system is trained, whenever a new image is given and the question is asked about the content of that image and the options are given, the system has to come up with the correct option correspond to the answer for the question on the content of the image. These are visual question answering tasks where the questions are all multiple choice type questions, but there can be even open-ended visual question answering tasks where on the content of the image we ask a question but we don't give any multiple choice options. We want the system to generate the answer, which can be a sentence or a phrase which is formed by a sequence of words. Like in this example that's shown here on the left hand side image, the question is, what is the zebra doing? If it's a conventional VQA with the multiple choice questions, then I may give only 2 options, eating and grazing, and the system has to pick one of these as the correct option, which in this case happens to be grazing. But the open-ended question answer type is where we don't give any multiple choices, right? We expect the system to come with the answer like what is shown here. The zebra is grazing in grasslands, which is a much more detailed answer, right, for this question on the content of the image. Similarly, for the right-hand side image here, what is in the dog's mouth is the question. The multiple choice type questions can be saying that it's just a toy or a purple toy kind of a thing, but a open-ended VQA says that the dog is playing with a toy in its mouth. Okay, so this kind of a system requires the ability to capture the content of the image related to the question that's being asked and then generate a sentence as an answer to the question. A much more complex task which the humans are very good at doing, right, is what is called the visual common sense reasoning, where I give an image, we ask a question, we give the multiple choices, we expect the system to come up with an answer, and once it comes up with an answer, we wanted to give the reason for choosing that answer. right? Like in this case, we give this image here. The question is, where is this happening? Then we give these 4 options. Then the system may say that the correct option is this option C, saying that this is a wedding. Then it has to say why it has chosen this option. Then again, there are 4 options that are given for this answer, and the system has to pick one of these options as the correct reasons, which is also called as the rational. In this case, the correct rational is the person 1 is dressed fancily and the background is fancy. Therefore, this is a wedding is the answer for this question. So this kind of a task is a very challenging task. Again, we can develop a system to perform this kind of a task using the deep learning models. Not one deep learning model, but a combination of several deep learning models which can be used to perform this kind of a task. Towards the end of the talk, we'll be looking at the kind of system one can build, right, to perform this kind of a task. This task involves several subtasks because we have to answer the question, then we have to justify the question, and after we do both these phases, we put them together so that for a given question, one will come up with an answer as well as the rational. Again, the answers and rationals can be multiple choice type or they can be completely open-ended. Obviously, the open-ended answering and justification is a much more complex system to build than a system with only multiple choice type options for the answers as well as for the reasons. Nowadays, there is a lot of interest on generative tasks, and one task related to the images is what is called as the image to image translation, where typically we have images in one domain and then we want to generate images in another domain corresponding to these images in the first domain. One such task is what is called as the sketch to image generation, where you have the sketches of the human faces and we want to generate pictures like almost photographs, right, which correspond to each of these sketches. Again, we build a system which is trained with several training examples, where every training example includes the sketch of a face and the corresponding image of the face of a particular person, and the system is trained with these training examples. After the system is trained, if I give any one of the sketches or I give a new sketch, it should be capable of generating the corresponding face image. So this is what is called as the image to image translation task. In this case, it's a sketch to image generation, but there are many other types of image to image translation tasks. Or I give some images, then I'll specify what kind of a changes I want to make to the content of the image, and we need to generate new images where these changes are incorporated. Like what is shown in this simple example here. I have pictures of the flowers here. Then for all the images that are shown in the top, I say that I want to generate new images where the flower has petals that are white in color and patches of yellow. So now we can see that the second rows of the images here are generated from the first row of images where all the petals are changed to white in color and all the patches are changed to yellow in color. And another caption is, or another input caption is, the petals of the flower have yellow and red stripes. Now you can see that there are new set of images that are generated. So nowadays we can build the models using generative models, specifically what are known as the generative adversarial networks. We'll be discussing them briefly towards the end of the discussion of this session, right? Where I give an image and I give what is called as the input caption, and we need to generate new images where the suggested changes are made to the input images and then the new images are generated. This is also the generative task. Or nowadays there is a lot of interest on what is called as the prompt engineering, and one such task related to images is where I give a prompt as input to the system, and then the system is required to generate an image where the content of the image is related to the words in the prompt. Like here, I give the prompt like a dream of time gone by, oil painting, red, blue, and white, canvas, white color, koi fish, and animals. Now, taking these words in the prompts, we want a system to generate an image like what is shown in the picture here. As you can see, right, it is an oil painting. There is a red, blue, and white colors. There are some fish and so on, right? So this is one generative task which takes the text as the input and then generate an image as the output. Another text image translation task is illustrated here, where the input prompt says a painting of a squirrel eating a burger. It's a sentence as the prompt. So now the system is expected to generate a painting where there is a squirrel that's present and where there is a burger that's present, and the squirrel is expected to be shown to be eating the burger. Whether it's realistic or not, it's a different issue altogether, right? But the system is required to generate an image that corresponds to the prompt that is given to the system as the input. So these are all data generative models, right? And nowadays there is a lot of interest on building the systems which can generate the data. We will not have time to discuss the current generative models for the images, mainly the diffusion models. We'll go only a pointer to that, but we'll discuss briefly the GAN models, which can also be used to perform the image generation task. Now, having seen what kind of image and video processing tasks one may kind of attempt using the deep learning models, let us spend some time on looking at some details of the different types of deep learning models which can be used to perform these tasks. I think all of you would have come across different names of the deep learning models. The simplest one is what is called as the deep feed-forward neural network. Then there is what is called a Boltzmann machine, the restricted Boltzmann machine, and the stacked restricted Boltzmann machine, which was studied extensively in the early stages of the deep learning field emerging. Then there is also what is known as a stacked autoencoder network. But what we'll be looking at is the convolutional neural network, which is mainly designed for image processing tasks. Then the recurrent neural network, which is mainly designed for sequential pattern processing, like any sequence classification, like a video classification or a text classification. And one type of the recurrent neural model that's very popular is what is known as the long short-term memory network. Then one can combine the two deep learning models, CNN model and recurrent neural model, or combinations of recurrent neural models, along with what is known as the attention mechanism to solve certain tasks. But in 2017, these models called as the attention-based models, popularly known as the transformers, have been introduced, and they are mainly designed for text processing tasks. But as we'll be seeing later, we can also make use of these transformer models for performing several tasks in the image and video processing domain. Then we have the generative adversarial network, which is mainly used for generation of the image data. And other two generative models, which will not be touching upon in this session, are what are known as the variational autoencoder models and the diffusion models. So in this session, we'll be spending some time on convolutional neural networks, recurrent neural networks, and the transformer models, and using them, how to solve some tasks in the image and video processing is what we'll be focusing on. As you might be already knowing, a standard feed-forward neural network is what is called as a multi-layer feed-forward neural network, which has the input layer. The number of nodes in the input layer corresponds to the number of features. Then there is an output layer where the number of nodes is equal to the number of classes. Typically, it's used for a classification problem. And then there are one or more hidden layers, and typically the number of hidden layers is a hyperparameter. This kind of a model can be used to perform any classification task or even a regression task. And typically, any such feed-forward neural network with more than two hidden layers is what is referred to as a deep feed-forward neural network. But here, all the layers are fully connected layers in the sense that the output of every node in one layer is connected to every node in the following layer. That's why it's called as a feed-forward neural network with fully connected layer structures. What is of interest to us when we are dealing with image and video processing is what is known as a convolutional neural network, which is a special type of a multi-layer feed-forward neural network that is designed for the image processing task. And actually, it has been motivated by the neurobiology. And as we'll be seeing quickly, mainly it is recognized to deal with the two-dimensional shapes where there is a lot of what is known as the invariance to the different types of distortions that can occur in the images. The three major types of distortions in the images are what are called the translational variations, the scale variations, and the skew variations. Translational variation refers to the changes in the positions of the same object in the different images belong to the same class. Scale variations refer to changes in the size of the objects, again among the examples of the same class. And the skew distortion refers to the change of the orientation of the object in the given image. Again, for different images, the same object may be present in different orientations. That's referred to as the skew variations. And the CNN model is mainly designed for dealing with the translational variations, but when you train the models with a large number of images where all these distortions are present in the training images, the CNN model has been shown to be invariant to these three different types of distortions. One of the most popular early CNN model was developed for the handwritten character recognition, which is called as the LeeNet, which is named after the famous scientist for deep learning, Lee Kun. He is the first author of this paper where we have taken this picture from. It's mainly designed for recognition of 26 alphabet characters in English. So it takes a 32 by 32 pixel image as input and then assigns one of the 26 classes as the label for the given input image. As you can see here, there are what are called the convolutional layers. In between, we have what are called the pooling layers. Basically, a convolutional layer performs the operation called as the convolution operation, which, to put it in simple words, is what is called multiply and shift. Unlike in the multi-layer feed-forward neural network, in the convolutional layer, every neuron takes the input only from the part of the input image, like what is shown here. Out of 32 cross 30 pixel image, I may take only a 4 cross 4 part of the image and then perform the weighted multiplication of or the weighted sum of the inputs from this part of the image and then compute the activation value and then pass it through the activation function to generate the output of this node. Then we shift the position of this receptive field by a few pixels and again we perform the same operation in the second node here. So basically what we are doing here is we use the same values of the weights for the connections associated with the different neurons here and then extract the same kind of a feature from the different parts of the input image. This is what is known as the convolution operation, and the weights are said to be associated with what is known as a kernel or a filter. And when we use a kernel with certain values of the weights, it extracts certain type of feature from the input. When we change the kernel weights, it extracts a different features. Typically, we need to extract different types of features from the input image. That's why we use what are called multiple kernels, resulting in multiple feature maps. In this specific case, it uses 6 different kernels to extract 6 different types of features from every part of the image, and these feature maps will contain those features as the outputs of the neurons in the corresponding feature maps. Then to reduce the size of these feature maps, we do what is called the pooling operation, where we take the adjacent elements here and then generate the output by either taking the maximum of those elements or taking the average of those elements, which are referred to as the mean pooling or max pooling, and it will help us to reduce the size of the feature maps. And then we again perform the convolution operation, then again pooling operation, and then we take the output of the final pooling layer nodes and give it as input to the output layer, where typically we use what are known as the softmax nodes to perform the classification task. So an important characteristic of CNN model is that the weights are shared among all the nodes in a particular feature map. This is what is referred to as the weight sharing. So the number of weight parameters that you need to estimate is much smaller compared to the number of connections we have in the model, unlike the multi-layer feed-forward neural network, where the number of weight parameters is equal to the number of connections that we have. And this has been shown to be helpful to deal with the translational variations. And there are different types of what are known as the deep CNN models that have been developed over a long period of nearly 10 to 15 years. And one such model is what is shown here, which is popularly known as the Visual Geometry Group Network, which is shortly called as the VGGNet. As you can see here, there are several layers of convolution, which are shown as the white colored boxes here. and there are also a few pooling layers. And this model is trained on what is known as an ImageNet data set, where there are images of 1,000 different classes. Many of these classes are very similar to one another, and this task is a very complex task. Like this, there are several other deep CNN models that have been developed over the years. Another popular model is the Google Net. Then there is a model called the ResNet, where it uses what are known as the residual connections. And many of these models also incorporate one of the normalization methods called the batch normalization methods to deal with certain problems in training large size models. And there is a nice review paper which gives the details of these different types of deep CNN models that have been mainly developed for the image classification task. Now, when it comes to the image segmentation task, one needs to design a specific type of a structure of the model, but this structure includes mainly the convolution layers, pooling layers, and also there is what is called as the up convolution. Typically, the standard convolution layer does what is known as the down sampling, because it takes a volume of certain width, height, and depth and generates another volume of a smaller width and height. Maybe depth can be more or less compared to the input volume. That's referred to as the down convolution. But there is also what is called an up convolution, where the output volume is having a width and height much larger than the width and height of the input volume. And the name of this model comes as a unit because of the structure of this model is in the form of the U shape. There is what is called two parts of this unit. One is what is known as the contractive part. The other one is what is called the expansive part. Basically, the contractive part generates a volume which is much smaller compared to the input volume, and then it generates, using the expansive part, a much larger size volume compared to the output of the contractive part. And this model has been mainly designed to perform the image segmentation task and also the classification of the objects associated with the different regions of interest, as shown in these examples here. There is also another popular model called as the FAST RCNN model, which stands for the Fast Region-Based Convolutional Neural Network. And later version of that is what is called as the faster RCNN, which is mainly designed to perform the task of object localization and object classification. As we were discussing earlier, given an image, it needs to generate the bounding boxes in the form of the rectangle around every object of interest, and then it has to come up with a label for each of the objects that's present in the given image. There is another popular model nowadays, which is known as the YOLO model, which stands for you only look once. This is known to be much faster in training compared to the two previous models that we have referred to, and it's a fairly complex structure that makes use of the convolution layer modules and also what are known as the residual blocks and also known as the spatial pyramidal pool, right, to perform the pooling operation of different resolutions. It generates what is known as the multi-scale detection output, where it generates the segments of the image with the different resolutions and the different sizes. Again, this YOLO is a very popular model. There is a nice review paper which gives the details of the different versions of this YOLO model, starting from YOLO version 1 to YOLO version 8, and it has been shown to give a significantly better performance compared to the other methods for the object detection and localization. Now we'll look at how we can perform the image capturing task using the CNN model as one of the modules. As we discussed earlier, the image caption task involves taking an image as input and then generating a caption corresponding to the content of that. And the encoder decoder paradigm for this task uses an encoder module and a decoder module. The encoder module needs to take an image as input and then come up with a representation of the image. And typically we use one of the deep CNN models like the Google Net or the VGGNet. We take the P final layer output of that model as a representation of the image in the form of a feature vector. That feature vector goes as input to what is known as a recurrent neural network, which can be trained to generate a sentence that corresponds to the caption of the image. So here we see that the deep CNN model is one of the modules in the system that performs this image capturing task. Now we'll see what is this recurrent neural network model, which is a slightly modified version of the multi-layer feed-forward neural network. In the standard multi-layer feed-forward neural network, the outputs of nodes in one layer go as input to the neurons in the next layer. That's why it's called as the feed-forward neural network. Now we make a small change in the structure of this model, where we take the output of the hidden layer and give it as input to the same hidden layer. These are what are known as the recurrent connections, and it's also referred to as the feedback connection. And this simple change in the structure of the model has been shown to be highly effective in performing what is known as the sequential pattern classification task, where we have to deal with the varying length sequential patterns, mainly in the domains of text and the video and the audio. And when these models are built using the standard artificial neuron models like the sigmoidal neurons, it has been shown to have what is called the vanishing and exploding gradient problem, where the derivatives of the error function with respect to weights have been shown to take extremely small values or large values, that leads to slower process of the training of the models. And one solution to that is replace the sigmoidal neurons with a different type of a neuron called as the LSTM neuron. We'll come back to that quickly. One can have a recurrent neural network model with more than one hidden layer. That's what is normally referred to as the deep recurrent neural network. As you can see here, the output of every hidden layer is fed back as input of the same hidden layer. Like this, we can have more than one hidden layer, resulting in the deep recurrent neural network. And this is also what is called as a unidirectional recurrent neural network, where the input to the hidden layer 1 is coming from the input layer. The output of the hidden layer 1 goes as input to the hidden layer 2, and so on. But there are what are called the bidirectional recurrent neural networks, where the information flows in two directions. Basically, the output at any time t depends not only on the past inputs, it also depends on the future inputs. And whenever we have this kind of a bidirectional RNN, it has been shown to be effective, more effective than a unidirectional RNN in dealing with the varying length sequential patterns. So whenever we replace the sigmoidal neurons with the LSTM cells, then we refer to this model as the LSTM model. This LSTM model performs three operations called the selective read, selective forget, and selective write operations. And these operations have been shown to be helpful to deal with the vanishing gradient problem in the recurrent neural networks. Again, I'll just skip the details of the gates. There is a simpler version of this LSTM cell where there are only two gates, input gate and output gate, but the forget operation is performed using one of these gates, and this leads to a simpler structure than the LSTM layer, but it can still perform the operations like the LSTM network. So it's common to find the GRU based models to perform the sequential pattern classification task. So now coming back to this image capturing task, I can combine the CNN model which acts as the encoder module along with a RNN model, let's say in the form of the LSTM model, which is trained to generate the text as the output of the model. So this RNN model takes the output of the pre-final layer of the VGGNet that captures the content of the image as the feature vector, and that feature vector goes as input to the decoder module here, which is in the form of a recurrent neural network, and then it can be used to generate, or it can be trained to generate the sentence that describes the content of this image, where we can see that the caption corresponding to this image is a young person drawing a face on the sheet. Now one can also solve the visual question answering type task using a combination of the CNN model and the recurrent neural network model. If you remember, in the visual question answering type task for the images, I give an image as input and also a question as the input, and then I want the system to answer the multiple choice type question. So here we need to get the representation of the image. We use a CNN model to perform that task. Then we need a CNN model, a recurrent neural network model, which captures the content of the question and then generates a representation of the question. Then we combine the representation of the image and the representation of the question in order to come up with the answer for the multiple choice type questions. So now we can see that an image question answering system is built as a combination of the CNN model and a recurrent neural network model. Now there are many tasks which are called as the sequence to sequence mapping task. A more popular task is the machine translation task, where I want to translate a sentence in one language called as the source language to a sentence in the another language called as the target language. So here the input to the system is a sentence in the source language. The output is a sentence in target language, and the lengths of sentences are expected to be different. And for different sentences as the input, the lengths are also expected to be different. Or if I want to generate the caption for a given video, the input is a video, which is a sequence of frames. The output is a sequence of words. So here also we are doing what is known as the sequence to sequence mapping task. One can solve this kind of a problem using a combination of recurrent neural networks. Again, this follows the encoder-decoder paradigm. The encoder module takes the input sequence and then comes up with a representation of that sequence, and that representation goes as input to the second recurrent neural network model, which acts as the decoder, and then it generates the output sequence. But of late, there are models called as the transformer models, which have been mainly designed for the sequence to sequence mapping task by using known as the attention mechanism based methods, where this term called attention refers to relations among the different elements in a given sequence. If you are trying to capture the relations among the elements in the same sequence, it is referred to as the self-attention. If you are trying to capture the relations among the elements in two different sequences, typically you want to capture the relations between the input sequence and the output sequence during the training process, then we are referring to what is known as the cross attention. This is a popular figure that you come across whenever you refer to the terms called the transformer models. As you can see here, again there are modules known as the encoder module and the decoder module. The encoder module takes the input sequence as the input and then generates a new representation of that sequence as the output. Then this new representation goes as input to the decoder module. During training process, we also give the desired output sentence or sequence as input to the decoder. Then it tries to capture the relations between the representation of the input sequence and the representation of this desired output sequence, and then it gets trained to generate the sentence that corresponds to the target sentence. Okay, so this is a popular figure that you come across, and the important entities in this is what is called the multi-head attention module, which is the one that is used to capture the relations among the elements in the given sequence. Basically, this multi-head attention module performs what is known as the attention operation. Actually, the terms related to this attention are borrowed from the regression task, where I think some of you might have been familiar with what is known as the function approximation task, where I have a set of training examples. The input is vector xn, then the desired output is yn. I want to generate the output for a new feature vector x. So what we do here is we try to look at the relation between this x, which is called as the query, and xn, which is one of the training examples, which is referred to as the key. Then we kind of measure a similarity between this query and key, and that's used as some weight factor applied on the value associated with the desired output of this key vector, right? And the weighted sum of these values is what is used as the output of the function approximation module, which generates the predicted value for this query x. And these entities, query, key, and value, are extensively used in the attention-based mechanism models, where given a sequence of feature vectors corresponding to a sentence, you might be coming across what are known as the word-to-vector representations or global vector representations for representing the words in a language, and typically that forms as input to the text processing systems. So typically, if I have capital T number of words in the given sentence, every word is represented by one feature vector. We denote that by vectors x1, x2, so on, x capital T. We take one such vector and then generate three different vectors by performing what is known as a transformation operation, which will come to quickly. There is what is called a query vector we generate, the key vector we generate, and the value vector we generate for every element in the input sequence. Then we take one query vector qt and one of the key vectors km. Then we look at what is the similarity between these two entities by using the dot product and then dividing it by the dimensionality of the vectors and its square root. This is what is referred to as the scaled dot product, which is referred to as the alpha TM value. Then we apply the softmax operation on the alpha TM values associated with all the elements in the sequence here. That gives us what are known as the attention scores in the range 0 to 1. Then for a given xt for which we have the qt, and we compute these attention scores with respect to every element in the sequence, and those attention scores are used to multiply the corresponding value vectors to generate the context vector ct associated with the particular element in the sequence. So basically what we are doing is we are generating a new representation of this x small t by looking at its relation with respect to all the other elements in the sequence, right? And then looking at a weighted combination of the corresponding value vectors to generate a new representation in the form of the CT. This is what is referred to as the scaled dot product attention. Now this query vector, key vector, and the value vectors are generated by performing what is known as linear transformations by using transformation matrices. That's where this name called as the transformer model comes into picture, because it involves performing several transformations on the elements of the sequence. So when you have this element of this sequence, the vector xt, when you multiply it with the different matrices, you get these different vectors. Then we use these query vectors, key vectors, the value vectors to generate this context vector for every xt to get a new representation of that vector xt. Now, when we use a set of transformation matrices, right, we get this new key vector, query vector, and the value vectors. If we change this weight parameter matrices, right, then we get a new transformation. So now we use multiple such sets of transformation matrices, and that's what are referred to as the heads. So now for the ith head, I have these three sets of matrices, and we make use of those matrices to perform the transformations and then generate these query vectors, key vectors, and the value vectors. And then for a particular head, we generate the context vector. And because the transformation matrices are different for the different heads, these vectors are going to be different. Therefore, the context vector that is generated is different. Then we concatenate all these context vectors together to generate the representation for the given element in the sequence. And this is obtained by capturing the relation of that element with the other elements in the sequence. And then we perform another transformation operation to generate the output of a single multi-head attention module that generates a new representation of sequence for the given input sequence. So typically this is the operation that's carried out in the multi-head attention module. In this case, we are looking at the 4 heads being used. We take every element in the sequence, process it through each of the heads, then we generate these 4 context vectors, we concatenate them and perform one more transformation to get the representation ZT. And remember that all these are what are known as the linear transformations. And in order to bring in the non-linearity, we introduce a position-wise feed-forward neural network model where there is a non-linear hidden layer. It's a simple feed-forward neural network model with one hidden layer, but it uses the non-linear activation functions. This brings in a non-linearity to the whole model. So typical layer in the transformer model encoder has this self-attention, multi-head attention, followed by the position-wise feed-forward neural network model. So the output of one layer is a new representation of the given sequence, but it's important to note that the length of the output of this encoder layer sequence is same as the length of the input sequence. This gives us only one level of nonlinearity. We use such layers, a number of such layers, so that we perform the operations using multiple levels of nonlinearity. So the final output of the encoder is the output of the final layer here, where there are L layers. So basically, we generated a new representation of the input sequence after processing several transformations and nonlinear operations. We generate a new sequence, which is supposed to be a more effective representation of the input sequence. Now, in order to generate the target sentence, we use the decoder module, which takes one of the inputs as the output of the encoder module, and in the training process, it will take the part of the desired target sentence, one word at a time, and then it is trying to generate the next word in the target sentence. This is what is the function of the decoder layer. It is similar to the encoder structure, except that we have the multi-head attention here that performs the self-attention. Then here in the cross-attention, multi-head attention, it captures the relations between the elements of the input sequence and the elements of the target sentence desired output, and then performs the nonlinear operations to generate the output of one decoder layer. And again, there are a number of decoder layers to perform several such operations. So typically, the transformer model includes the encoder structure as well as the decoder structure, and all the operations are carried out using the transformations, both the linear transformations as well as the nonlinear transformation operations, and that's the reason why this model is called as the transformer model. And the number of parameters in this model is very, very large, and it's very common to find that one does what is known as the pre-training of the transformer model using large amount of data that's available. Typically, it's done in an unsupervised mode of learning. There are different types of pre-training done. The most popular one for text operations is what is known as the bidirectional encoder representation from transformer, which is shortly called as the BERT model. And for the image and video processing tasks, there is a pre-trained model called as the vision and language BERT model, which makes use of both visual data and the linguistic data. Then the popular model called as the GPT model, which stands for the generative pre-trained transformer, that's been pre-trained with only the text data. We'll see how one can use these transformer models along with the other modules to perform the different image and video processing tasks. Actually, there is a very popular transformer model to perform the image classification task, which is called as the vision transformer, where given an image, it divides that image into several patches in a particular order. Then it generates a sequence of these patches from the given image. Then this sequence is given as input to the encoder layer, and the output of the encoder layer is processed to perform the classification task. Basically, we represent the given image as a sequence of feature vectors corresponding to the different parts of the image, and then this sequence is given as input to the encoder module of the transformer, and the output of the encoder module is processed to perform the classification task. This is what is referred to as the vision transformer model. One can also do the image capturing task, where the encoder module takes the sequence of parts of the image as input. Then the decoder module is trying to generate the sentence corresponding to this image, and then this whole structure can be used to perform the image captioning task. One can also do the video captioning task, because now the encoder module takes the video as the input, and then the decoder module is trying to generate the sentence corresponding to the caption of the video. So again, there are papers which talk about performing the video captioning task using the transformer modules alone. Then one can do this visual question answering task using a combinations of these models that we have seen. The typical framework to perform this image visual question answering task is given an image I want to capture the repetition of the image using the encoder module, and we need to capture the repetition of question. That's what is referred to as the question encoder, which is the text encoder. Then combine these two representations and then come up with the answer. So one can use the CNN model or a VAT, Vision Transformer model, to act as the image encoder, and one can use a recurrent neural network or the transformer encoder to encode the question, and then combine these representations, then build a simple classification model to answer these questions for the multiple choice type questions. And one can also use this pre-trained Wilbert model to perform the encoding of the image and the question, and then come up with the answer for that question. Then one can also build an open-ended visual question answering system, where the final module here is replaced with a sentence generator module. But other than that, this is similar to the VQA system that we have seen earlier. One can also do the visual question answering task for the videos, and there have been attempts to solve this visual common sense reasoning, where we need to come up with an answer as well as the reasons for that. Again, one can build this visual common sense reasoning system, a combination of CNN model, vect model, and the recurrent neural network models, right, to perform this common sense reasoning task. We'll briefly look at the generative models to generate the images. Again, there are a variety of generative models. What we'll be looking at is only this generative adversarial network, where there are two different modules, generator module and the discriminator module. Discriminator model is a simple CNN model that takes an image as input and then tells whether it's a real image or a synthetic image. And the generator is actually trained to take a random input and then generate an image which is obviously a fake image. And it uses the adversarial learning. That's the reason why it's called as the generative adversarial network. And these generative adversarial networks can be used for generation of the images, and they can also be used to perform several other types of image processing tasks, like the image manipulation that we have seen earlier, or for image-to-image transformation. There are specific types of GAN structures which have been designed to perform this kind of a task. Or nowadays, we have systems to perform the prompt engineering as well. The latest models for image generation are what are called as the diffusion models. What I'm going to tell you is a very simple model where it takes the image, clean image as input, then it progressively adds noise so that it generates more and more noisy images over different stages of processing. Now, at the end of this process of adding the noise, we perform what is called as the denoising operations. But it's not only the denoising that is done, we also have the mechanism to generate a new image as part of the denoising process. You can see that the image given as input is different from the image that is generated as the output here, right? This is what is known as the denoising diffusion model, which is mainly used for the image generation task. And many studies have shown that this diffusion model based image generation is giving a much better performance than the GAN models or other type of generative models like the variational autoencoder models. There are a number of textbooks that are available nowadays, right? There is a book by Bishop on deep learning foundations and concepts. There is also another book on neural networks and deep learning by Charu Agarwal. There is a book by Ansari on building computer vision applications using artificial neural networks. This edition in 2023 has a few chapters on the deep learning models and how to use those deep learning models to perform applications in the computer vision. And there are a few other books on the deep learning. One can refer to these books. So with that, I would like to close, and hopefully we have some time for taking the questions. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful talk, for covering almost all types of deep learning architectures that has been proposed over the years. Participants, you can ask your queries. You can write your queries in the chat box. So they can only write the
Okay,
queries
sure,
in
sure,
the
sure.
chat box.
No problem. I already see that there are a couple of questions here. Okay.
Okay, okay, sir.
The first question is from Shweta. How fusion is used in the process? There are different types of fusions that are available. The simplest fusion is concatenation only, right? So let's say if you're talking about the fusion of the representation of the image and fusion of the representation of the question in the visual question answering system, right? You simply concatenate them, right? But there are also what are known as the task model attention nowadays, right? Where you take the representations of the two sequences, right? And then perform the cross attention to perform the fusion. Actually, the Wilbert model performs this kind of a fusion, right? So there are a number of options that are available to perform the fusion. Then there is a question about 6 kernels. Yes. Then only 6 types of features are extracted from the input image in the first layer of the CNN. Yes. The number of kernels determines the different number of features that are extracted from the given image, right? But if you look at the architectures of the deep CNN models like the AlexNet or VGGNet or GoogleNet, right? The number of kernels used in every convolutional layer runs to a few hundreds, right? So basically, we extract a large number of features from the input and we combine them, right, in the later layers to perform the task. Semantic segmentation and instance segmentation, I'm not really familiar with this term, right? Typically, the tasks that we have mentioned, like localization of the objects and labeling the objects, is what is referred to as the semantic segmentation. Yes, the diffusion models are shown to perform better than the GAN for the image generation task. I'm not familiar with their performance for the image enhancement task. You need to look into the papers which discuss that. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I don't see. Yeah, there is one more question. So if you want to apply.
If you want to apply image captioning to an application which has a dataset available with multi-level classes but no captions, can we annotate and make our own dataset examples, right? Actually, nowadays there are many datasets available in the public domain, right? We would advise that you take those public domain databases or datasets and then build your models rather than trying to build your own dataset and then trying to build a model, right? If you want to get some experience, right? But if you have a particular task where you have to use your own data, right, then you have to generate the training data sets. But typically for the image captioning task, the training data set is an image and the corresponding caption, which is typically in the form of 1 or 2 sentences for the image captioning, whereas for the video captioning, the caption can be several sentences. All right. So you need to have the data sets which have this kind of desired output specified. What if multiple attention units are implemented after each of the query pairs are updated? I'm not sure about this question, right? Typical encoder layer uses what is known as the multiple head attention, which means that we are performing the multiple attention operations, right? When should we use attention and when we should not? Okay. What all we can say is that the attention that's used in transformer models is the basic operation that is compulsorily required. There is no way you can perform the transformer model operations without the attention. But there are encoder decoder paradigms with and without attention mechanisms, right, which are used before the transformer models came into the picture, right? And what many studies have shown is that the models that use attention are shown to perform better than the models that do not use the attention, right? Basically, there also the attention is used to capture the relations between two different entities, right? Like if you are doing the sequence to sequence mapping using a pair of recurrent neural networks, you need to capture the relations between the input sequence and the target sequence, and that's where the attention module is, attention operations are used, right? So even in the recurrent neural networks, the attention was used, right? But nowadays, attention is normally referred to with the transformer models. Why patch splitting is useful in VIT? VIT is basically a transformer model, and the input to the transformer model can be only a sequence as the input. So given image, I need to generate a sequence as the input. So that's why we split the given image into several parts, and then we put them in a particular order, and then come up with a sequence that represents the whole image, and that sequence is processed by the encoder module of the transformer. So the patch splitting is important or required compulsorily because you want to process an image, and that image needs to be represented as a sequence. Otherwise, how do you generate a sequence from the given image? Right? If you don't want to use the patches, right, then how do you generate the sequence? A very basic representation is you can represent the image as sequence of pixels, right? But that length of sequence will be too large, right? That's why, let's say if I have a 100 by 100 pixel image, I may use the 10 cross 10 pixel size patches, right? So that we get a smaller number of patches, and we represent the image as a sequence of feature vectors corresponding to all these patches. Right.
Yes, sir. I think, sir, yeah, that was the last question. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'm sure that I think there will be very detailed discussions on all these models that I have referred to in the later sessions of this FDP, right? Then you'll be able to relate whatever is discussed there to what I have presented.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, sir, for sharing a very